So when I received my Sony A7s III, I went to my wife and said, "Babes, look, it's arrived. Look at the camera. Isn't it awesome?" And she was like, "Yeah, it's, wow, it's cool. It's new, isn't it?" And I said, "Yeah, there's so much that's changed since A7s II. It's like, oh, can you see how different it is?" And she was like, "It looks exactly the same to me. Why have you bought the same camera?" Whew. If you have to explain this to your wife, then I'm hoping this video will help you. And here, today, we're going to talk about exactly every single difference that has been changed in 5 years, from A7s II to A7s III. Let's do it. A7s II was released in October 2015. A7s III was announced in July 2020. I received mine in September, was it September? October 2020. So there's a few different areas that I'd like to show you what's been changed, and it's interesting to see why Sony took 5 years to release A7s III. Okay, so we're gonna look at the body, we're gonna look at the image quality. Sorry, I've got like pages and pages of notes here. We've got low light performance, we've got autofocus, menu system, usability, stabilization, and loads of other things. So, you know, keep track on the YouTube chapters below on this video. You can see different things, so you can hover around if you're interested in certain bit more than the others. But let's jump right into it, and the first section is the body. So generally the A7s III over here is bigger in every single angle. As you can see, like the body is bigger, the grip is bigger, and it's good. It's heavier as well, and it's good because Sony A7s II was very small. The grip was not very good to hold over here, and it's been much improved, which I like it a lot. Let's have a look at some of the body that's been changed now over here more. The shutter button angle is changed a little bit more. The way it turns on is a much better kind of smoother click, how it feels on your hand. All the buttons, by the way, feel more spongy on the A7s III than A7s II, which was a little bit odd for me at first, but now very quickly you get used to it and you love it much more. They travel much less than this one, and it's much nicer pressing these buttons over here. They're much more like kind of, you know, better just feel on the buttons. Then we have this mode dial wheel that's been changed, slightly different modes, and camera mode and manual mode are next to each other now, instead of this, which was one of the biggest complaints people were saying. We have the exposure wheel over here, which has a locking mechanism on this side. So if we look at these over here, then this one you can lock, doesn't move, unlock, and now it moves. Okay, then this other scroll wheel in the back over here used to be inside the body on the A7s II over here. As you can see, it was inside the body. Now it's been moved on top of the body to make more room inside the body for different things. The hot shoe mount on the A7s III is a smart hot shoe mount. If you say, there's different accessories that you can connect to it, and then it's gonna use these connectors inside this hot shoe over there to connect to the camera. Unfortunately, it's not available on the A7s II. Now let's move on to this side over here. And one of the first things you can also notice is these fiddle bits that used to be like one of the first things that everyone just cut off on the camera because they made loads of noise. But this time they've somehow tightened the hole or designed them so they don't make any noise. You see, you can't fiddle them about. That was the sensor inside that was shaking, not these over here if you heard the little voice. So that's that. These SD cards, this used to be just one slot over there, and now we have 2 slots, but it's more like 4 slots as well, because you can put 2 different types of cards in there, SD cards and CF Express Type A cards in there, and dual card slots, and much better to open them with one hand, slide down and open them. Whereas on the A7s III, it's still like after 4 years of use, it's still very, very kind of fiddly to get that out of the way. Whoa. Let's have a look at the front. What's changed in the front? Not much really. It's very similar still over here. The front grip is bigger on the A7s II, like I mentioned before. This wheel is in the same place. This thing over here is the only thing that's changed, like a little camera light thing, it's a little bit bigger, but the rest of the things are exactly the same. So now if you move on to the other side, we can see that one of the biggest things that's changed over here are the ports, okay? So on the A7s II, we had only kind of 4 ports in here. So there's one micro USB port over here, one micro HDMI port, and then the microphone and headphones jack. Whereas, these little flaps are very fiddly. On the A7s III, we have doors, okay? We have one door for the camera microphone. So if you want to use the microphone, you don't have to use any other doors. Very, very nice to have that. We have another door here, which is a bit bigger for the headphone jack over here. So if you want to monitor your audio, then we have another door over here for USB-C port, and then micro USB port. So USB-C can be used for charging as well as transferring the files from the camera to the computer. So if you don't have a SD card reader and you need to transfer the files, you can use this USB-C port to do that, although using an SD card reader is much faster than this. And then you have another micro USB port over here to connect to the camera. If you want to wirelessly control it or control it with your computer, then you have to use that one over here. Now, if you don't know what this over here is, then this is actually a speaker over here, which they have moved. On the A7s II, it's on the top over here. So if you're playing back a video that you just recorded with audio, it is actually over there, but on the A7s III, it's there. As you can see, it's not on the top over here. These on the side there, these are microphones, the built-in microphones on this side and that side of the body. If you didn't know that, there you go, that's on the same place. But yeah, the microphone port over here. And then one of the biggest other thing over here is a full-size HDMI. So now when we move on the back of the camera, you can see there's a few things changed over here, like the button layout is a little bit changed, okay? This bottom section is kind of the same on both of them. We have a function menu, but now instead of here, we have a little joystick, which can be clicked down as well, moved and clicked down. Instead of here having like a switch and a button, so you can switch it up and down and then press that. All of this is customizable, by the way. And then on top of here, we have C3, which on here is moved to this side, is C3 over there. So we have AF on, we have C1, and we have AEL. So there's like 3 buttons on the top over there. And then on the right side, we have the menu button on the A7s II, and then in here there is 2. A7s III and menu button. Let's have a look at the flip out screen over here, okay? On the Sony A7s II, we have like this tilty option over here, whereas on the A7s III, it's completely flippable. And then, which way does it go? Yeah, that way as well. So if we turn them on, you actually notice that they are very, very similar to what used to be. So the screen size and in terms of quality, they're very, very similar in terms of sharpness. The A7s III has a better contrast ratio and things like that. So the blacks are more black instead of here being more gray. So more towards OLED, more like, but it's not completely OLED over here. Oops. And it is touchscreen, as you can see over here, okay? On the A7s II, it is not touchscreen, but the screen size is exactly the same. Funny thing, the A7s II screen, actually, when you look at the text and compare it very, very pixel peeping the text to text, then the A7s II screen seems to be a bit more sharper than the A7s III. But it's true, when you're using this monitor to focus your shots and footage, then it's much better using this one because it is sharper when using on video mode. This went soft when using on video mode, whereas this is still sharp, so it's still better monitor, but it's not bigger, and I wish there was more resolution to it, but that hasn't changed, but it's still sharper. Also much better colors in this as well. One of the biggest complaints on the A7s II was that the screen is dimming and is not very bright, but that has been fixed with A7s III. It is much, much brighter than that screen and doesn't dim or go off on any of the frame rates, whether external recorder is connected or not. So in terms of pressing record on the Sony A7s II, the record button was in a very awkward position over here on this side, which has been moved to the top over here on A7s III. And you can actually start recording on the shutter button as well if you wanted to. This can be customized to, you know, start recording over there, and this dedicated record button on the A7s II, I had mapped the record button over here. So this C3 was my record button, not that one. I hardly ever used that one because it was such an awkward place to use it, but you can't use the shutter button to start recording. In terms of body, another thing that has been changed is this viewfinder. Okay, this viewfinder on the A7s III is the best viewfinder that is in the world at the moment. At the point of making this video, there's over 9 million dots on this viewfinder, and people think, or what I've seen so far, that this feature is very useless, whereas I completely disagree. When shooting weddings, this was one of the main features that I used, because when shooting people, I wanted to fit in with the photographers and things, and when I was shooting handheld, people mingling or whatever, it's so nice using this viewfinder. Or when you're outside and you can't see the screen because it's too bright, you can use this viewfinder, which is fantastic on this one. So I personally am very happy that this viewfinder is almost like looking in real life. It's very sharp, absolutely awesome to focus on this. And when you use this on your face and putting this, you get another point of contact with your body, and the video is even smoother than just shooting handheld. But when you have this connected to your eye, you have another point of contact, you press it against it, you get very nice and smooth handheld footage. I did mention the SD cards before, but this on the A7s II is UHS 1 card, but on the A7s III there is 2 UHS 2 SD card slots or 2 CF Express Type A cards. Okay, that should conclude the body. Now it's time to talk about image quality. Now on the specs, both of these cameras have the same amount of megapixels, you know, like 12 megapixel sensor, although the specs are slightly different. So this A7s II has effective pixels of 12.2 megapixels, where A7s III has 12.1 megapixels, and the total of A7s II megapixels are 12.4 megapixels, where this one is 12.9 megapixels. Now, I don't know if this is like a little specs quirk, but this is what the specs say. Both of these cameras are full frame, as you know, but in Sony, if you have this orange ring around your sensor or the sensor mount, that means full frame 35 millimeters. So both of these are full frame sensors, 35 millimeters. So let's talk about the frame rates. This A7s II can record 720p at up to 30p or frames per second, and the A7s III, being the successor, can't do that. So this is too old. 720 is too old for A7s III. Full HD we can record at 120 frames per second up to on A7s, and up to 240p on the A7s III. Obviously there's a massive crop factor involved in here, whereas this one hasn't. So double the frame rates on full HD. On 4K on A7s II we can record at up to 30 frames per second, and on the A7s III we can record 4K at up to 120 frames per second. Now, most people think that this is it about the frame rates and the sizes, but actually the A7s III can record also 4.2K over via HDMI cable. So if you connect an external recorder, you can actually record about 4.2K on here, which is fantastic. If you plan to crop in a little bit or add later stabilization or things like that, then you can do that on the A7s III, whereas there is no change on the HDMI recording on A7s II. Another big thing about the image quality is that the A7s II could record and only up to 100 megabits per second on the bit rates, whereas on the A7s III bit rates are going up to 600 megabits per second, and that is internally. If you record over the HDMI externally, ProRes RAW or something like that, then the megabits per second can be even bigger. Another massive difference on the image quality is that the A7s II was only 8-bit camera, whereas the A7s III is a 10-bit camera. And you think, well, there's only 2-bit difference. What does it actually matter? Let me put it this way. A7s II, by being 8-bit camera, can only record 16.7 million colors, and you think that's plenty of colors on your color palette. But Think of it this way. This A7s III can record 1.07 billion colors. That is with a B, billion, okay? So if we divide, you know, these colors by these colors, then you can see that the A7s III has 64 colors for every single color that A7s II has. So if you have a one shade of green on A7s III, then the same shade of green has 64 shades of green, for example, on the A7s III. So whenever you get a bit of bending in the sky, then this is not the truth anymore on the A7s III. Another quick thing I forgot to mention is that since the A7s II, the color science on the A7s III has changed massively. So as you can see on the A7s II, my skin tones are slightly green. Obviously this is straight from the camera without any picture profile, but this thing applies to every single picture profile. So the color science has changed within the picture profiles. But as you can see, my skin is a little bit green compared to the A7s III. It looks so much more pleasing to the eye. It has changed a lot. But there's been a few generations between those two cameras where the color science has been improved, like the Mark III cameras, like A7R III, A7 III, there's A7R4 even out there, and A9 cameras. So now, finally, there is a pretty good color science on Sony as well. So I don't think there is any issues or no one that can say, do you know what, Sony color science sucks anymore. I think that has been addressed. Another secret weapon of the A7s III is the HDMI port. We have mentioned it slightly before, but over this HDMI port, you can record 16-bit RAW. Now, let me just put it this way, that both of these cameras can record pictures at 14-bit format or color depth, whereas on the HDMI over here, we are getting 16-bit RAW, which is very, very impressive. In fact, it's absolutely ridiculous. There is a slight marketing trick over here, because if you look at any of the recorders and competition cameras, then they all say that, oh, 12-bit output over HDMI. And you're thinking, oh, wait a second, Sony A7s III is obviously better because this is 16-bit, it goes 14-bit and then 16-bit. It must be obviously better, but this is 16-bit linear bit depth, whereas if you compare this with a recorder, for example Atmos Ninja 5, then this records it at 12-bit log format, which is much more what you can actually see with human eye. And if this just blows your mind and you're like, what the heck are you talking about, then please watch this video over here. I don't know what this guy's name is, but he explained it absolutely fantastically. If you want to know very nerdily how this log and, you know, external raw bit and bit depths and everything, how this works on the A7s III, then watch this video. If you were shooting on the A7s II, then you probably remember that the actual base ISOs for a lot of these things were not very good, or by not very good, I mean they were very, very high. And that has massively been improved on the A7s III. So if we go to the picture profiles, then let's have a look at these different base ISOs for different profiles. So the base ISO has been attached to the gamma. So looking at different gammas over here, we can see that the movie camera on A7s II was 100 on the base ISO, and then on the A7s III it is 80 now. So if you have no picture profile, the base ISO is 80, whereas on the A7s II it's 100. When we move on to the still, it is 100 as well. So is Cine 1 and Cine 2 and Cine 3, all 100 on the A7s. So when we move to still, then the A7s II was at 100 ISO, A7s III is 80. Cine 1 is 100, Cine 1 here is 64, Cine 2 is 100, A7s III is 50. Cine 3 is 100 on the A7s II, A7s III is 80. Cine 4 is 200 on A7s II, A7s III it is 100. ITU 709 is 100 over here, and over here it is 80. ITU 709 800% is 1600 over here. A7s III is 640. S-Log2 on the A7s II was 1600, and so was S-Log3 at 1600, whereas on the A7s III the base ISO is 640. Now you can actually go below the base ISO, and the lowest you can go is 160 ISO. But bear in mind, if you go below the base ISO, you're actually losing a little bit of dynamic range, but sometimes it's worth giving up a little bit of dynamic range when shooting outside and you don't have NDs and things, but you can pull your ISO down that is fantastic. The rolling shutter was absolutely jello on the A7s II, but on the A7s III that has been massively improved, and there is no jello effect. Well, no, I'm being a bit optimistic. There is slightly on here, but basically you can rule out that problem of having rolling shutter unless you completely panning and flipping your camera around all the time. As you can see over here, even if I move my hand, my hand starts doing jello, because this has been filmed here on the A6500, which is similar jello effect on here, but this is much better at rolling shutter because the actual processor inside that processes the speed or processes the frame rates and the camera sensor is much faster over here. For that reason, the rolling shutter is not a big problem. Now the low light performance. To demonstrate that, I'm actually filming this on the A7s III, and this is a very dim light situation. I've got a small table lamp in the back of the monitor that shines on the wall over there. It's very dim. So these are the computer monitors that are only lighting my face right now. I'm shooting at f1.4 Sigma 35mm f1.4 lens. It's ISO 500 and no picture profile. So standard, this is what it's coming out at. I'm gonna put this lamp back because it's slightly pleasable for the eye. It's not as blue then. So now let's have a look at some of the tests that I've done here on the Sony A7s III versus A7s II. So what has changed and how much has the low light performance improved? Now, there's some interesting things going on over here, and this section is going to be quite long, so bear with me. Okay, so let's have a look over here. On this test over here, we can see that there is A7s II and III both running at the same ISO, and checking like what's the difference on the same ISOs. This over here has been filmed with no picture profile, and then there's 3 pictures over here. As you can see, it's like on the lower part we have the main image, then a bit zoomed in, and then very zoomed in over here to compare really like pixel peeping over here. Interestingly enough, what I found on all of the tests, the same ISO for if you go both of the same cameras on the same ISO, A7s II, the older model, seems to be a bit brighter than the A7s III on the same ISO settings when both of the camera settings have been matched over here. So I'm gonna just let it roll through over here, and as you can see, even over here, the slight difference on the color, but you can also see that there is a difference on the 10-bit and 8-bit. 10-bit seems to be having a little bit more dynamic range on the normal here. As you can see, the light reflecting on the table over here, it's much more blown out on the A7s II than A7s III. So that is interesting. And now on the higher ISOs, A7s II is much more noisier than the A7s III. You can clearly see that, so that is nice to see. But it seems to be a bit brighter as well, as you can see on the face over here, even though both of the settings were matched. So we're ridiculously high, ISO 1600 over here now, and 204,000, and now 406,000 is the maximum ISO that you're going to see now, or 409. And okay, I'll stop down now a few. This is stop down on the aperture, so just close it down so we can actually have a bit of a more exposed image, more overexposed, but previously you can see just how bright it is. And both of them do all right, but obviously 10-bit here is a bit better, but both of them have very weird artifacts on the image. Can you see some green blob over here, green blob over here? So both of them are that, but the A7s III seems to be slightly better. Now, much more interesting test is over here, where I'm testing just A7s III over here, okay? And on this test, believe it or not, in the middle over here, this screen has been actually split. So if I take this off, no, where are we? So there's 2 separate clips over here, and you can see there's 2 clips next to each other. One is filmed at ISO 640, and the other side 12,800. And as you can see, they are identical performance, okay? So this is filmed on S-Log3, 640 and 1200 and 800.
Billions of, I think it's $2.3 billion.
12,800. So this has been filmed on ISO 640 and ISO 12,800. And 12,800 is the point where A7s III kind of changes to the other dual gain ISO. I'm not sure if it is a dual gain ISO. It sure acts like one, but but a lot of people say it isn't actually, and officially it isn't, but it kind of performs like it is one. As you can see, this is the same image shot on 640 and 12-800, and it's exactly the same, like seamless image, okay? Now, when we go to the next bit here, 800 and 1600, exactly the same. You can't see this in the middle. It is perfectly seamless image, which means that they kinda go up exactly the same, like a dual native ISO. The noise performance is exactly the same. Now, when we go a little bit further away, and then I think over here, this is 1250 and 25,000. The next stop over here, you can see a difference here in the middle. It's because the increments of the ISO aren't the same anymore. One changes 1.25 times, whereas the other one changes 1.28 times. And I was like, oh, it changes then. But yeah, if you actually, you know, equalize them out, then the performance is pretty much the same, which is very, very interesting. Basically, you can say that the ISO performance is exactly the same as 25,600 ISO as 1,250, which is mental. It's absolutely mental. Okay, that's just an awesome thing to see over here. And the same over here about the 3,200 ISO and 20,000 ISO. I'm just swiping the image. As you can see, it's literally the same image. As you can see, there isn't any difference, and let's zoom it in a little bit. You can see inside here there is a slight difference in the detail over here, but honestly I can't see the difference, and I'm looking at it, the big screen, 32-inch screen, it looks exactly the same, okay? And then the last test, which is very fascinating over here, is between A7s II and 3, and then the same ISOs at different points, comparing to the exactly the same framing, exactly this, because over here on the previous one, the framing wasn't exactly the same because I was filming them both cameras at the same time. Whereas this one, I had the same lens, same framing, and doing exactly the same. And you can see that there is a slight difference on different things. First of all, the A7s II at the same ISO performance seems brighter than the A7s III, as you can see. Look at this light over here, and over here there is a definite difference. Even on the guy's face over here, it's James Bond by the way, it's difference. And when we move up 5,000 ISO, you can see the same thing. The A7s II seems to be brighter definitely than this one. Just look at the background over here. You can see how much detail is on this. For example, this, let's open it a bit bigger. So over here on this camera, this back camera over here, this completely just blends into the shadows, where the A7s II seems to be more details over here. Now, I'm not sure if this is the S curve that's been changed on this gamut, because they're trying to pull the highlights down and then the shadows down a bit more, but it's definitely interesting over here. So as you can see, the ISO performance as well, on 5,000 ISO, it seems that A7s II is doing a better job than A7s III, okay? This has shot on both maximum like quality. They can both do 4K and 8-bit and 10-bit, and on A7s III I'm shooting an SI codec, so as high quality as possible. You can see the ISO performance, or the noise performance, is definitely worse. This is much more usable than this one. This seems much more noisy on 5,000 ISO. Can you see that? And now when we move on to the 10,000 ISO, the same story. A7s III is much worse performance, but then when it switches to 12,800, then you can see that there's much better, much cleaner image on the A7s III. So when we look at even the overall performance, then you can see that the shadows look so much more black over here, and A7s III is more gray and loads of artifacts going on over there. And it's probably because of the 8-bit codec as well. There's so much more detail and actual, you know, dynamic range, and just much more info that's been saved on the A7s III. Now, in terms of sharpness of the image, I am not sure if the A7s III is sharper. So if we look at just this bit over here, okay, this is the guy's shirt over here, and very zoomed in image, it looks like A7s II is sharper. This has been shot exactly on the same lens, same settings on both of them. Even the nose over here, as you can see, this is much sharper line over here than over here, which kind of leads me, or leans me towards this dual gain setup being more like a noise reduction setup. But according to Philip Bloom, who did the test over external HDMI and ProRes and looking at the files, it's not ISO performance and the noise reduction that's going on over there, which is a little bit confusing. Is there dual native ISO or not? But on 12,800 you can see A7s III is much cleaner, and then on 20,000 we're actually getting the similar, very similar performance over here. The noise performance is exactly the same. So kind of thinking there is a switch between 12,800, but then at 20,000, when we're back at 20,000, we're seeing exactly the same performance, right? I don't think one image looks more noisier than the other one, as you can see over here. You can see that the A7s III and A7s II look similar. If not even A7s III looks a little bit more noisier than A7s II. So, I don't know what to say. It looks like it's cleaner, but at the same time, it doesn't seem to be cleaner. Help me out, guys. I'm very indecisive. I've done over 2 days of testing on this, and I'm still undecided whether one is better than the other one. Because at certain ISOs, like 12,800, A7s III looks much better, but it looks darker as well. And then when we move to 20,000, they look very similar. A7s III actually has much more purple going on over here. Look at that. There's much more purple than over here. What is going on? So has the low light performance improved? Kind of and kind of not. So autofocus. Autofocus is something that has been improved much on the A7s III. As you can see, it can keep up with your face much better and it's much faster. That is because the A7s III is a phase detect autofocus compared to the contrast detect autofocus on the A7s II, which is much slower. Now, on the A7s III, you have a lot of options also to change the tracking speed and the transition speed of the focusing speed sensitivity. So it's good to have these options depending on your subject. You know, how do you want to do it? Do you want the focusing to be faster? Do you want it to be slower? And both of these cameras here have been set to wide autofocus. So check it if it's gonna, yeah, finally, come on, get into focus. Eyes, come on. No, still not eyes, but A7s III keeps it up much better. On the A7s II, obviously you have no options of adjusting the autofocusing speed or autofocus anything. There's no autofocus settings. There's basically on and off. The also good thing on the A7s III is that this autofocus on video is not just on human eye tracking or human face tracking. It can also track animal eye and faces, which is very helpful if you're a wildlife photographer or videographer. You can get your autofocus tracking these faces over there. The A7s II also has a face detection autofocus system. Not sure if it works on 4K, but it kind of has a square around your face, so you can get it detected, but it's not nearly as good as A7s III. Now, A7s III autofocus system is top of the class in the world. It can't get much better on video autofocus than A7s III, so that's that really. When talking about autofocus, what else has been improved on the A7s III is the tracking function. So when you press on the touchscreen, you can actually get a subject or the camera to track your subject, and then whether it's an eye or whatever, which is fantastic. So tracking is a big thing that has been added also on the A7s III. I like it. Okay, we have menu systems. Now, the A7s II here is probably the world's worst menu system, because there is no way to know which is what and what is where, because it's just all over the place. And I'm sure if you own one of these, you would agree, and it's just all over the place. Now, on the A7s III, this has been massively improved. First of all, we have a touchscreen function over here. We can move between different things, and it's very easy to find something. So for example, if you want to find anything to do with like image settings or image quality, you go to the camera, and it all makes sense. You want to find something about autofocus, it's very easy to find it. And I have nothing to say against this menu system. I like that a lot. One of the other features that is very good is this My Menu option over here. So you can just save your own favorite settings over here. For example, like I found format, I put the format over here. So if I want to go to My Menu 2 and format, I can quickly format the card if I wanted to. So there's a massive improvement on the A7s III on the menu settings. Another thing that both of these cameras, well, A7s II when it came out was very leading or very good, was that all the things could be customized on this over here. So if we go over, So if you remember, there was custom key settings, and all these custom keys and wheels and things were able to be changed, which was absolutely good and very nice. But on the A7s III, they've taken this on to a completely another level. So when we go to dial customize over here, we can customize a lot of things. So as you can see, there is operation customize. You can customize when you're shooting videos, when you're watching back videos, when you're watching back photos, when you're shooting photos. There's function menu, there's special things, everything can be customized. So A7s III has even more customization options than A7s III. So now let's talk about the usability between these two cameras. How is the A7s III better at using and creating videos than the A7s II? First of all, one of the main features of it and the A7s III is the time-lapse feature. You have a video and photo time-lapse feature built into the camera where you can do that either S&Q settings or actual interval shooting on the photo mode. Whereas on the A7s II, you had to buy a separate app and then get it over there, which was very faffy because you had to go into the app and the app wasn't as good as the photo mode. So you were limited on the time-lapse features, which is much better on the A7s III. Next of all, on the A7s III, you can change the white balance while recording, as well as the white balance being stepless white balance. So if you want the A7s III to adjust your white balance slowly and smoothly, it can do that. In terms of the battery life, the A7s III has these new batteries which are much better. These are the Sony FZ100 batteries, whereas the NP-F50 batteries are twice as small pretty much, and they're twice as bad really. This battery, we can pretty much say that the new batteries can give you double recording time. From my testing, obviously it depends on the frame rates, but still you can easily think double the battery life than it was on the A7s II. When we keep talking about the battery life, then on the A7s III we have now a USB-C port that can be used to power the camera as well as charge the batteries. Now, Gerald Undone said that when plugging into the USB-C port over here and using a battery power bank, for example, or plugging it to the wall, you can pretty much have unlimited recording, and that is not entirely true. According to my testing, when you use the frame rates or lower frame rates, whether it's 24, 25 or 30 frames per second or something like that, then that is true. When shooting and having a power bank plugged in, the battery percentage does not drop. Although when plugging into like maybe a 60 frames per second, 50 frames per second or higher frame rates, then you're going to start to lose the battery percentage because the battery uses more power than it can suck into through the USB-C port on the side. The power option over USB has been improved, whereas on the A7s II it was a bad, so when you had your USB power bank plugged in, no matter what frame rates you were shooting, you were actually losing power. You could increase your battery life maybe half the time or 40%, but it eventually still died. Whereas depending on the frame rate on the A7s III, it does not die. When talking about recording times, then the A7s III out of the box comes without any recording limits, and you can just record as long as you want, and you're only limited to your battery power or how long the battery can give you this, although you can put a dummy battery in here and then record, in theory, endlessly. Whereas on the A7s II had a 29 minutes and 50 second recording limit out of the box. Now this is easily unlockable, and you can unlock this camera to be unlimited as well, which I have done, and I have seen no overheating issues. Which leads me to the next point. Let's talk about the overheating. On the A7s II, over the 4 years that I've been using, I've only seen it overheat once, and that was when I was shooting a play in a theater in a very hot room. There must have been more than maybe about 30 degrees Celsius in the room, and it was getting extremely hot, and then it eventually overheated. But I was about 2 hours into the shooting when it overheated, so I can't really complain, but there has been situations where the A7s II has been overheated. Now on the A7s III we have much better frame rates, much higher bit rates, everything's better in terms of, producing heat, but the processor inside is much more efficient, and the overheating is not an issue. Now, if you're shooting whether on 25 or up to 60 frames per second, you don't really see overheating, but when you're shooting 120 frames per second, you're probably limited to around 30 minutes recording time, and then the camera overheats. But I don't see anyone using the 120 frames per second more than 30 minutes. So I think we can easily tick the box and say there's no overheating issues on this camera. like the R5. Is it too soon to make that joke? Like mentioned on the body section as well, the A7s III has 2 card slots, which is much better obviously than one, but this can accept CF Express Type A cards as well as UHS 2 SD cards, which is fantastic if you want to back up or have your camera record simultaneously on both of the cards. Both of the cameras have a lot of custom buttons that can be customized, but the A7s III has taken it a step further and have even more buttons that can be customized and more options to be customized. What do you want this button to do? And going between photo and video modes, you can have them to do different things. Another thing that has been improved on the A7s III is the turn on time. So let's have a look. Turn they both got the cameras on at the same time. Ready and ready. No, not ready. And now ready. So this gave me already a warning. So let's try it again. Go. Ready. And ready. So it turns on much faster. Another cool feature on the A7s III is that if you go onto the menu settings and on the first tab and then around the 10 shooting display and it says EMF display do recording, if you turn that on, then your screen is going to go red around the edges to show you that you are recording, which is fantastic if you want to make sure that it's very eye-catching when you are recording, so I like that. The file naming system on the A7s II was absolutely horrendous because every time you format the card, it started again from the same place. So I put a new card in, it started from 0001. So if you had the project where you had multiple of these cameras and you went to Premiere Pro, for example, then the editing program was very confused which files are which. So I often messed up a lot of edits because the file naming was the same, whereas on the A7s III you can have a continuous file naming. So even if you format the card, it's going to continue off from wherever you left off, and you don't have these file names that are exactly the same even though you format the card. And you can customize your naming on the files whatever you want, whether it's date or time or even a custom message on the files on A7s III. Image stabilization is another thing we should mention. Now on the A7s II it was easy. Steady shot inside, you have an in-body image stabilization, and that is it really. It's not the best in the world, but it helped when shooting handheld and took some of the shakes off. Now on the A7s III, the IBIS is pretty much the same. Now from what I've tested and my experience, the IBIS performs exactly the same, except for a few little quirks. So A7s III has a few more features on the IBIS. For example, you have such thing called active IBIS, which means that it's going to use a little bit more of the crop of the image and the electronic image stabilization, and you get a little bit better IBIS function or handheld footage. It's not as good as the Panasonic GH5 or Panasonic in-body stabilization, but it is fair enough and it does pretty good of a job. On top of that, there is something called a catalyst stabilization that you can have on the A7s III. And how this works is if you turn off the in-body stabilization and all the stabilization is off, later on when you go to Sony's own program called Catalyst Browse program, you can stabilize the footage using the gyroscope data that has been baked into the metadata of the files. And you can get some very amazing results on this camera. It's pretty much like using it on a gimbal, but the only thing you have to mention or remember is that you're gonna have a bit of a crop on the image, but the results are fantastic. So IBIS hasn't improved much in terms of the in-body stabilization, but electronically and software-wise, there is some improvements on the A7s III. So hopefully now you can explain to your wife what has changed in 5 years since the A7s II to A7s III. Now, if you would like to see any other specific tests or anything like that, or to go more into some kind of topic about the A7s III, then comment below and let me know. Also, question of the day for you is, did you learn anything new in this video, or did you know every single thing that was in this video? Thanks guys for watching. Bye bye.